It's like, you see me standing here right next to you. When are you going to shut up?
That's where you got to put the arm around them and say, okay, just praise God for a great story.
But you know, turn the mic off. You turn the mic off and keep going. But no one's walking out, and you know, you're seeing other guys come up to these folks after they share their great story, after the event, and they'll tell you, you know, yeah, 4 or 5 guys came up to me and talked to me about this right here, and we're going to get together. So I think that, and then again, in that Gage environment, that's something that really helps us out for the great story. Likewise, in the deploy class, part of that segment is putting together your great story and sharing it. So again,
in which class?
In deploy.
Ah, cool.
So that is part of that, that you put your great story together and you share it with the folks in there. So we've had, you know, 1 last week, week before, 2 tonight, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. But they see that, so that's good from that perspective. So one of the things I think we're going to have to look at doing is how do we maybe incorporate a little bit of that into the social media aspect of it, so those can be available, you know, on the Ironman Facebook page and so forth as well. So those are things that I'll be meeting with John Cook and his tech team on. But again, making that avenue much easier for folks to hear great stories, because it's just cool hearing them.
And that goes in line, like with the, like in Battle Zone, they'll talk about the apprentice model, like teach me, show me, release me, you know, kind of a thing.
Reproduce me, yeah.
Yeah, and really, I think men tend to like, hey, if he's willing to show me what that looks like, I can, but maybe it's not just a gender thing. Maybe it's just a rabbinical or a discipleship paradigm. Yeah, like when people do it and you get a feel for it, it's like, hey, I can do that.
Yeah. Spiritual gifting, real quick. It's an area we need to work on a little bit there. I mean, and again, in the deploy class, we do focus on spiritual gifting, taking the spiritual gifts test. But from taking the test to actually, again, getting off the bench is kind of the, okay, you figure this out, what are you going to do to get out and start, you know, using the gift that God has given you. So we get one gentleman talk about the guys that came out and sang last year for Father's Day, and now like 20 of them are in the choir. So again, you know, it's now taking it to the next step. So you're taking it to the next step of what that spiritual gifting would be. We have tons of guys that are skilled in all areas that could be used in Potter's hands that just simply aren't getting connected in that way. I mean, I look at every facet of where men could be serving in the chapel. You look at the parking lot, there's no reason there shouldn't be a dozen guys every Sunday in the parking lot instead of the same ones all the time. So, although when I say parking is a spiritual gift, yeah, I wouldn't say it's a spiritual gift, but it is a personality type that a person can be out there serving someplace, and that kind of gives them a gateway to another area where God really might be pointing them. But if they're not getting connected in the easiest parts that don't require a huge amount of sacrifice, then that's something that needs to be addressed.
I had a question just with regard to the current setup. Do you feel like with basics, deploy, and battle zone, do you feel like they're set up in such a way that you're really getting after these things, or do you feel like maybe you're retrofitting them to accommodate these? I'm asking it not with an angle. I'm just curious. Is that something you've thought through?
Well, with the courses, I mean, with basics and deploy, I mean, there are segments of those that focus specifically on intimacy with God and relationships. So it's built right into it, and it's just something we just need to focus and make sure we're holding guys accountable to continue to do. So when we leave the class tonight, there should be some follow-up. Say, hey, did you join one of the groups? You know what I mean? But there are segments that are built into both of those that specifically talk to those areas right there.
Okay. Because I was thinking, like, I'm going back in basics, and I'm like, okay, the names of God, important. Does that move me down the, like, knowing Jehovah Rapha, Jehovah Jireh? Is that helping a dude
right
with engaging God? It might be. I'm just asking the question out loud. That's all.
No, those are good questions to ask. Yeah. And it's funny you say that, 'cause some guys will tell you differently. You know, you look at some like that, that's great, I never knew that.
Yeah.
I was like, well, that means nothing to me.
Right, okay, yeah, so it's a mixed bag of
Yeah.
response, okay.
But further in that course, which is 8 weeks, you are getting into that intimacy with God and
Yeah.
other aspects as well.
That's cool.
You know.
Thoughts or ideas, or, yeah, Pastor Dean?
I was able to come to the 3 of the breakfast this term, and so that would mean that I didn't come to all of them, but when I did come, those 3 times, the grace stories, which I think are very helpful, but the grace stories were shared by men that appeared, regardless of how long they've been saved, to be on the front end of a journey with Christ. In other words, baby steps.
Mhm.
And while that, I'm sure, is incredibly encouraging to people in that environment, again, I don't know what you did the other 3, but perhaps to mix it up where we have someone who is further down the road to get their grace story. The men who really have walked with God for a long period of time
Sure.
and have actually something of great value to speak into people's lives as well,
Mhm.
as the new believer does as well. But just, like I said, I don't know what you did the other 3 or 4 times.
Okay.
Any suggestions or thoughts, you know, that could help Leroy as he's just processing through this? Like, hey, I have an idea or I have a thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just, if grace stories are, they sound to me like they're a real powerful component, you know, of your breakfast. And this is a thought. Do you have a table, a table point person at each table, Leroy? Is there a host at each table? Or
No, we used to, that's something we've gone away from, that we
Okay.
probably need to kind of.
No, yeah, I just, because my suggestion would be,
Mhm.
is, and either in addition to or in place of, maybe sometime, rather than have a dude on the front, you know, on the stage, maybe have a time of, hey, here's, you know, for the next 10 minutes, you got, each table's got a guy who's gonna share at your table, you know, hey, let me tell you my story. You know, so it's more of an intimate environment.
Sure.
And it's just, you know, that kind of thing. Just a thought, man.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good one.
Anybody in their ministry domain say, oh, we have this idea and it really works with regard to this, you might want to think about this, or any thoughts at all?
I just want to ask a question on in the basics deploy in that series. How many of the men are having confusion with the question of separating out? You know, we always say it's not a matter of doing the Bible study, it's a matter of the Bible study doing you. How much are they having struggles with separating Catholicism and their religion that they grew up with and grasping the concepts of what it really is about who you are in Christ and who Christ is in you? Do you see that in those groups, or what do you observe?
What I've seen mostly in the guys, and again, I look at that, my short 12 months, is the guys that have left Catholicism altogether, so that's almost not even a factor anymore. That they at one point were practicing Catholicism, left home, never went back, and now they're been reintroduced to church. So not coming straight out of Catholicism right into church. But there's this huge gap where they were doing nothing whatsoever. But you hear them all talk about Catholicism, though, you know, and trying to understand relationship. So, but you almost hear all of them talk about Catholicism. But there's a huge gap in most of them between, man, I just left that thing altogether 20 years ago, and I'm just now coming back. Or that have been here for a while but never engaged in anything for a while, so they have at least been able to partake in the teaching, you know, on the and now they're, oh yeah, I think I'll take that class. But you can certainly see it though. You can certainly see it now.
I think it's good. I just think it's a real. You got a tough ministry. Everybody has a tough ministry, but men are not driven by relationships. They're driven by tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Women are driven by relationships. So it's a totally different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to ask men to get involved in relationships is really hard. because they typically get involved in a relationship around tasks. So the more you think in terms of the task being the vehicle to the relationship instead of the relationship to the task, I think you're better off when it comes to men. That's just from what I've observed in counseling through the years, because a lot of Adams are still hiding in the bushes.
See, Rich,
Yeah.
I can't
but
buy
Rich,
that.
I've found on multiple occasions that the guys that come into these environments are, they're seeking relationship. They want to have, you know,
There are
Christian
guys who do.
friends.
There are guys
I
who
don't,
do.
I wouldn't say it represents everybody, but there's,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of guys that are looking for it. But then what I find is that they're just not willing to do the hard work to make it happen. So there are ways for you to engage, but they're just not doing
Just
it.
doing the hard
Well,
work.
men are, you know,
Yeah,
they're
I'm
the
sorry.
loners. You know, men, a lot of men are loners, not all.
Just along, I mean, just
I
along
can't
the
buy
line
that.
of,
I
say-
can't buy that statement. I mean,
You don't think a lot of men are loners?
No, I can't buy that statement.
Why?
Because relationships are very important to me.
I think they
That's
don't
not
know
what I'm
how.
saying.
I think
What are you
it's more
saying?
they don't know how.
I'm saying that men do not grow up gifted with relationship. It's not like that they don't want relationship. It's just that sometimes they have fear of relationship, sometimes they're too busy, they think, for relationship, and a lot of times they don't want to do the hard work that goes along with relationship. There are some guys who are really relational. The Don Siegels, the Louis, those people are really relational people. But there are some guys. And the truth of the matter is, we're just taking the tip of the iceberg, so there are a lot of guys who haven't come. And I think the question is, how do we get those guys to come?
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
just, you guys, I mean, you already have a bunch of these environments, and it's kind of along the lines of what Rich was saying, kind of not, but are there more environments we could create that are shoulder to shoulder versus face to face? I do not like to sit down in front of a guy and share my heart and share my stuff. But if he and I are playing golf together, or he and I are working together, all of a sudden these conversations come out. I mean, the guys that I've gotten to lead to Christ were shoulder to shoulder relationships, and then eventually they turned into face to face conversations. So I guess the question is, are there more environments like what you're talking about? You already know, obviously, Potter's Hands is an incredible environment for that. The reason that this landscaping crew is so close to each other is because they're shoulder to shoulder every Thursday. And then all of a sudden they have these conversations, and now all these guys know what's going on in everybody's life. So maybe is there a way for men's ministry to facilitate more golf outings, or more, whatever these different environments are, that just put guys where they're playing something together or they're working on something together? Because that does build, it builds the rapport to go
Sure.
into relationship.
That really, I think, is significant, because that's the part of the men's breakfast that I'm terribly uncomfortable with. Well, I'm sitting with 6 guys, 4 of which I do not know.
Mhm.
So,
Right,
you know, I'm not gonna, I don't want to open it,
right.
because I don't know you.
Because you don't, yeah, you haven't built
You know,
anything
so
there.
accountability is built differently, I think.
So the budget next year, you'll see a Chapel fishing boat, John, just so you're aware.
I know you're trying to squeeze that one in.
Yeah.
Build a golf course instead of doing
Yes.
fields.
Golf course.
Oh, there you go.
Take it over, Geico! I was thinking like a little putting.
Well, the other side, the other side of it is what I think we sometimes don't do is, instead of creating it here, like, why not have guys join a beer baseball league?
See, that's what, like, that's what
I
I'm
think
hearing.
that's not-
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
Like,
ahead. I
rather than
cut
do
you
a
off.
church baseball league,
Yeah.
encourage guys maybe that if they're have good boundaries, to join the beer league and play people, and then you're playing baseball, and then at the end of the year, you know, they have to have the guts to share the base story, or maybe they go to the I don't know if it's a marina or whoever. I'm not a fisherman, so I don't know.
You will be.
No, I won't, but
Sure.
some guys are.
Yeah.
Will be sure.
It does raise some good questions though around, you know, Ryan had mentioned earlier around the fact that things are event driven. And, you know, the breakfast was designed to be something that is an easy way for guys to invite their friends to come along. But what we're finding is that it does happen, but not as much as we would like, especially when we talk about the number of guys that attend here. You got 2,000 plus men that come through the doors here on a Sunday, and we've got 250 of them coming to a breakfast once a month. So there's a disconnect, and how do we continue to engage guys? So like some of the things you're saying, Benji, I think that makes sense. what are the easy ways for us to be able to engage the community? What do they like? You know, what are guys spending their time doing? And we've talked about that in the past. It's, you know, it's sports, youth sports, what have you, that, you know, that dads, guys are engaged in. That's how they're spending their free time.
Taking tours of Flying Bison Brewery. That happens.
I had a pastor-
I've heard.
I had a pastor tell me that if you get a couple of beers in the guy, he'll tell you his whole life story.
I wasn't saying about the beer league that they need to drink beer. I was just saying.
I understand.
I have a
I'm
lot
not
of friends.
suggesting of you, but I'm
I
just
have a lot of
saying
friends
that
from high
probably
school.
open up.
Sure there is.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. I have a lot of friends from high school that play like beer leagues. I'm
I know
saying
you're.
they don't want to come into my church league, but if I was to play with them,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think there's
From what I.
We're doing it in Vintage, man. We got a weed league, you know.
that's why we have both.
There's dope, there's hope.
I think
That's what
what
I'm
you're doing is
saying.
great. You have a combination and
No
you have a
dope,
blended
no
both.
hope.
It's not one or the
No
other.
dope,
Right.
no
What you
hope.
have is really good. You can have both.
That's what the Well has. They've got a softball team that plays in a regular slow pitch league, and they just are really friendly to the guys. They're nice to them. They
Right.
comment during the game, everything else. Try and show an example for the church.
I think it's a good point, like Joe, what you were saying. I apologize for cutting you off earlier. I didn't mean to. It's kind of like the gathered component. Like there are people that have a paradigm of church, and for them to be present in an event like this, or an event-driven paradigm, I think we absolutely need that rhythm. But at the same time, there's a component, and I think it really bleeds into this, which is like, what are we doing to mobilize people for, you know, I mean, I played in a beer league. It's funny, when I started working here, I stopped playing in beer leagues. I don't know why, I just did. And it's just weird to me, you know, that there's that tension of when someone becomes a follower of Jesus, it's almost like the first thing we do is we want to take them out of that community, purify them, develop them, you know, make them a disciple, and then it's almost like they've lost touch with.
Right.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying, like, some of the most vibrant times that I had, even though I didn't see a lot of people come to know Jesus, but really relationship, sharing my faith, was just before I started working here, you know, which is about 3.5 years ago. Now, I've seen people come to know Jesus in my neighborhood and in other areas, but it's just been, the intentionality behind it has had to be very conscious. So, and I liked what you're saying, Joe. I'm sorry that I cut you off. I didn't.
No, you're good.
Why don't we do this? Let's
the video.
Let's finish up with yes. Apologize. Oh, that was official. Let's get a shot of the room. Pastor Rich, you want to smile? Okay, why don't we finish up with?
This is the hard one, is, you know.
And it typically is when we get into this stuff. It's like, what are we doing though? Like, great, let's do this. Let's do this for what's happening here. What do we got?
Yeah, as far as the saturation, you know, that's as far as into the non-believing community, it's not there. You know, that kind of goes back to what we talked about in the first two, is getting this into the community. Missionally, you know, the guys that are engaged and getting them engaged, at how are they missionally sharing the gospel in their circles of influence, and how are we collectively able to do that, you know, as a men's ministry / church to do that. Yes.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but with all the grace stories that are being shared, do you ever hear any examples of how they're sharing it, like in their context at work or anything like that? Or is it primarily just sharing it at like an environment event?
Yeah, most are sharing it at an event like this, and now they're knowing their grace story. So I don't know if that's a good question to find out from the guys that have they had an opportunity, you know, to share it outside of that now that they've actually put that together.
In other words, how do you know they're not doing this? Is that right?
I don't know that they're not. Right, I don't know that they're not. I know that they now know it, and they're now equipped to share that because they have. So I don't know that they're not, and I don't know that they do. But it's a good question to follow up with them to say, hey, have you had an opportunity to do that, to encourage them along?
I had a question in regard to saturation, and it goes back to geographic specificity. I don't know if it was when Scott was still here, or maybe I did it with you. Plotting your people. Do you know where your people are that are on like a men's ministry list?